Welcome to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast, and I am your host, Olivia Fierro, local news anchor here with Arizona's Family in Phoenix, and the host of Olivia's Book Club, a community connection since 2019, sharing books for people who love books, people who maybe don't make enough time to read and want a little nudge in the right direction, or maybe, I don't know, you're listening to the podcast instead of reading a book, and that is also okay by me. Maybe you'll at least add one to your list for the next time you decide you have the time. We will not judge. Just make sure to subscribe and download this podcast wherever you are. So I'm joined in studio by our super producer and the person who reads way more than anybody else I have pretty much ever met. That is Margaret Stewart. Hi, Margaret. We'll be talking to Margaret for some book recommendations coming up a little bit later in a segment we call A Moment with Margaret. But let's begin with the lady of the hour, our guest. Samantha Ettus is CEO of Park Place Payments. She's the co-founder of the Los Angeles Women's Collective, which is aimed at supporting women running for public office. And she shares her life perspective, business expertise, and, education as a Harvard business graduate and author of 5 books, including The Pie Life, a guilt-free recipe for success and satisfaction. She is a motivational speaker. She is an entrepreneur. She is a mom. She's all of it. And she has a lot of girlfriends, too, which is always a quality worth admiring. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. It is so good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia. Every time I see you, I'm like, I wish I lived closer to Olivia and she could be one of my girlfriends.
I would absolutely sign up for that because you're the kind of person that I imagine everybody wants to glean advice from. And part of what I was loving about your book here, The Pie Life, you're breaking down our lives into components, realizing that our attentions, of course, go in all of these different directions. And you make time for community and the friends and family that you need to lean on. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But give us an introduction to the basic concept of the pie life and how is it going to help us sort of with the real struggle of trying to achieve work-life balance?
So for years, I was so surprised that there's really not been a positive framework for how to think about managing our professional and personal lives. As women, we have so much negativity thrown at us. Like, you can't have it all. It's brutal. You're just going to survive motherhood and working moms are so harried. And I felt a little bit resentful of that. I was like, I'm a much better mom because I work. I feel like more women need to see the bright side of it and the positive aspects of being a working parent. But they really have no framework for how to manage it, right? We're taught to think about work-life balance, but for something to be in balance, it has to be equal. And if you have a thriving career, you're never spending equal time at home and at work. And then we hear about, having it all, and you can't think of any man or woman who has it all. So it's a ridiculous yardstick. And then we talk about juggling and like how many of us can juggle, right? So all the things we're told that we're supposed to be doing, we can't do. So what I recognize after working with thousands of successful women is that the ones who enjoy their life the most and were most fulfilled were the ones that allowed themselves to play in 7 different slices. Mm-hmm. Their careers, their family, their relationship or their quest to find one, their friends, their community, their hobbies, and their health. And a lot of times as women, especially if we're perfectionists, we think, okay, if I'm just a wife and just a mom, I'll be the best wife and mom ever, and I'll never miss a moment, which isn't possible, right? And if I'm just going to work out and focus on my career right now, I'll be in great shape, and then I'll think about friends in 10 years. That's not how life works, right? So you want to be able to give yourself permission to be in every one of those slices and not to beat yourself up on the time you're spending in each one, because you're probably pretty rational about how you're spending your time. It's more about making goals, very specific goals for each slice.
Well, and I love that you mentioned too, there are some weeks or days or even hours where things are not going to be, certainly aren't going to be spread across all of your slices. You're going to be very focused on work, and certain times are going to be intense, or very focused on family, or maybe you've had a busy work week and you haven't given as much time as you'd like to family, but you still have plans to go on a date with your spouse or reconnect with your girlfriends, and you say it's okay to just give yourself the grace and space to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, would you rather say no to your girlfriends going out for margaritas or having dirty dishes in the sink? Like, it's much better to have dirty dishes in the sink and say yes to the margarita. That is my version of work-life management, right? Like, that's what you need to have a fulfilling life. And it's so funny because I work with a lot of moms who will say, oh my gosh, I feel too guilty. And then you say, well, what if it was your own child? When they grow up, what kind of a life do you want them to lead? And the answer is always, I want them to be happy. I want them to have fun. But if they don't see you allowing yourself to have fun and enjoy your life, odds are they're not going to grow up to have a very enjoyable life either, because you're their model. They're watching your every move.
There is a lot to dive into coming out of this pandemic in particular. And women have, I think, had to bear the brunt of the burden of figuring out how to navigate a new normal, and so much change and so much stress and uncertainty, and watching that impact your children, certainly having it impact people's mental health, their physical health, their relationships, being stuck in home with people 24/7 and not having the freedom that you're used to. How do you think that we should be looking at this time period as we're navigating our way out of it, and somehow maybe striving to find a better quality of life than we had before all of this?
I think you want to take from it what was positive, right? Maybe it's that you're suddenly having family dinners 5 nights a week with everyone. Maybe it's that you're actually finding time to listen to your child as opposed to just having them on a schedule and not really seeing who they are or letting them be. So I think you want to really take the positives out of it and take those with you. I also have found that a lot of people, including myself, it kind of forces you to curate your crowd a little bit, right? Because we're not having as many casual relationships or casual conversations, because most of us weren't really leaving the house. It's definitely made people sort of pare down and figure out, who are the friendships, who are the relationships in my life that make me feel great inside? Who are the people I want to be spending my time with because we have so little time together? Who are those people? And so I think that's a real positive to come out of this, is use it to curate your crowd. You have a choice, right? I always say, like, never ever say your friend well is closed. A lot of people will say, I have my best friends from high school and I live right near them. I don't need any more friends. That's not true, right? The average person lets go of half of their friends every 6 years just because of circumstances and life changes, and you change as a person. And so it's perfectly healthy to make sure that you're surrounding yourself by positive people. So that's one thing. The other thing is our kids' school, right? Like, I know in my house, I have 2 teenagers and a 10-year-old, and it's been super hard on them. I mean, various times it's hard on one and not 2 of the others. It varies, but it's been a roller coaster for all of us. And so I think a lot of it is realizing, like, we are all struggling. We all need support from each other. And hopefully the empathy that we have for our children throughout this period will stick with us and we can carry it forward. I'll tell you that yesterday was my first time on a flight in a year and a half. Yeah. And I mean, I was definitely like, whoa, this is a lot for me. Like, it's sensory overload. Like, I'm an empath. I'm feeling everyone's pain. I haven't been around this many people in a long time. Like, it was a lot. And I think that we have to give ourselves permission to, like, take it easy into reentry, because it is really difficult. It's a challenge. Now, what you asked about before in terms of the workforce and really figuring out, how we fit in our careers after all of this, I think that's super important. I think it's really important to realize, if anything, that you want to have a solid base, right? Because at any moment, our financial foundation can crumble. And I think a lot of people realize that through this pandemic. And so financial security has to become more of a priority, especially for women. You see so many women give up their financial stability and security when they get married or when they have kids. And it puts your whole family and yourself in a financially vulnerable, position in the future. And I think that's really important to think about.
And I like that you talk about that so much through your book and with your work, because there is sort of the pretense that your career could be there later. Say if you had a foot in the door, you had a start, or you have the education, that you would be able to reenter the workforce later, that it's always waiting there for you. It's sort of a comparable analogy to how, women, we always get the pressure about when to have children, because you're worried about the timeline of, will it be waiting for me, or will I have lost my window to have had children? But really the same, it does go for careers, even though you'll see women reinvent themselves many times over. To step away and to give up that time, you say is really not only a negative for your potential, but also probably for your mindset and your quality of life. And I would always think it would put too much pressure on me to be this domestic goddess that I have zero potential to be. So it would be really tough.
Well, okay. So first of all, it's a myth that we sell women, right? From the moment we see a pregnant woman, we say, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay home and focus on the baby's feeding and eating schedule or sleep schedule? Or are you going to go back to work? And we don't put that same guilt and pressure on men who are becoming dads. And unfortunately, the statistics don't bear out as positive. That really isn't a choice. So if you leave the workforce for just 2 years, there's less than a 50% chance you'll ever find a full-time position again for the rest of your entire life.
Wow.
So a lot of couples do faulty math and they'll look at the lesser earner's income, which is often the woman, and they'll say, well, you were only making $40,000 a year as a dental hygienist. And, I'm making much more than that. And childcare alone is $30,000. So it really doesn't make sense to have someone else taking care of our child. But really, you don't want to be doing that math. It's not 1 year to 1 year. It's those 5 years that you'll need childcare compared to your future earnings forever. Because even if you do find another job, it impacts your future earnings forever. So it's really important that we start talking about this. I think women don't talk enough about money and about their earnings. It's really was the impetus for me starting my company, Park Place Payments. I was on book tour for the Pie Life. I met so many women in corporate America who wanted more flexibility. And then I met so many women who left the workforce and couldn't get back in and were starting to sell makeup and skincare and, essential oils to their friends. And 90+% of them were not even making martini money. Most of them were actually losing money on the multi-level marketing companies. And I thought, hold on, what if I could train these women to sell financial services, which would be recurring revenue opportunities to their local businesses? And I wouldn't charge them. I would train them for free. So I tested the model. I trained women in 6 different cities. We had former newscasters and Olympic athletes and doctors and flight attendants, teachers, and trained them to sell credit card processing to their local dry cleaner, their kids' pediatrician, their dentist, et cetera. And based on their success, we launched Park Place, and now we have 650 account executives across the country. Some of them do it part-time as a side hustle, some of them do it full-time, but they've been really successful at it, and it offers them the flexibility and future financial security that they need.
Wow. It's so compelling to always hear, and it's kind of a life affirming, I guess, to understand that the struggles that we all go through internally or maybe within our, intimate friend group that we'll discuss really are so common and so relatable. I mean, these conversations are happening with women of all ages all over the country all the time. I want to talk about your urging to discuss money, because I think that there are still so many households where one person's in charge of the money and one person isn't, and we don't know, the other one doesn't know what's saved, what the overall expenses are. And that is really, even if you're, that seems to be a very hard spot to get out of, right? That's a dynamic that is difficult to change.
It is. And I think one of the things that you said just a minute ago is so true, which is that we are all having the same conversations. Like, our experiences are far more similar than they are different. Wherever you are, whatever your socioeconomic situation is, whatever your ethnicity is, geography, we're all far more similar than we are different. We all struggle with really the same kind of six or 10 problems. Mm-hmm. And in terms of, figuring out money, I think that we as a society are terrible at talking to girls about money. We talk to our sons about money, and we don't talk enough to our daughters about money. So from very early on, you want to make those conversations gender neutral. Mm-hmm. Whoever your child is, educate them about money. Get them comfortable talking about money. How much mommy works really hard because I want to be able to afford that vacation that we just went on. Mm-hmm. That's what allows us to take that vacation. So when you attach, financial viability to what you're doing, your work, or what other people do, I'll sometimes say to my kids, if we're at a fast food restaurant, I'll say, that person works so hard and they're capped in how much they can make. They make an hourly wage, and no matter how great they do at their job, there's no tips, there's no way for them to make more than that. I want them to understand those things. And I think that we need to have these conversations early on. Now, most of us became adults without getting comfortable talking about money. So what do? at your next girls' dinner, don't just talk about your relationship and your marriage. Talk about money and your relationship to money. When you ask your girlfriends, Olivia, I'm going to challenge you. Next time you go out with girlfriends, if you say to them, I want to talk about the longest relationship we're ever going to have in our life, and everyone's going to be silent, and you say, the relationship we have with money. And people are going to be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And it's funny when I ask my girlfriends, they'll be like, wow, I have so many issues with money because my parents never saved enough. We were always in debt as kids. Like everyone has a money story, and you learn so much about people through their money story. And so figuring out what your money story is actually allows you to take charge of it.
That's really a great conversation to have. And I think also as we saw so many people go through a real financial crisis over the last year, maybe people struggle that hadn't really before. And it sort of, put a spotlight on, oh my gosh, have I been saving the way that I need to for emergencies? Do I, am I living beyond my means? And these are great conversations to have, especially as you're figuring out what you're going to be navigating in the future. You wrote, there's so many great issues that you're addressing in the Pie Life. And one of them is sort of that voice in our heads that is constantly doubting, questioning, challenging ourselves, or being our own, I think, probably worst enemy or biggest obstacle. So when you're coaching somebody, and I assume these are already highly successful people or people with infinite potential, how often are you hearing these same themes of, it sounds like someone's getting in their own way?
Oh, I think we're all our own worst enemies, right? We second guess ourselves. We suffer from self-doubt. Now people call it imposter syndrome. I don't love that term because I think it's just self-doubt, right? It's a fancy word for self-doubt. We all have self-doubt at times. I'm a huge believer that the worst thing you can do is compare yourself to other people, right? It is just a fact that the person next to you who you see as having the perfectly behaved kids, the perfect body, the perfect relationship, the perfect career, whatever it is, that person has struggles that you don't know about. And there is no person that doesn't have challenges and struggles. And you're much better off keeping your own grass green than focusing on other people's grass. And I think when you let go of that, when you can just let go of any envy or thinking someone else has it all, then it's really freeing. I even share this with my kids. I say to them all the time, like when they were younger, they really don't do it anymore. But when they were younger, if they said, oh, Dylan's so lucky, he gets to have sleepovers all the time, or she gets to have sugar cereal, whatever it is, right? I would say, you know what? Life is a package deal. So if you had sugar cereal, you would live in that house with those parents and those siblings. Is that what you want to do? And they'd be like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not an a la carte menu. It's a package deal. And in this house, we don't have sugar cereal or whatever it is, right? It's like, it's a really good way to think about life. If you had that career, you might have that lawsuit they're battling. If you had, you never know what health problems people have. If you had that marriage, there might be infidelity. We don't know what goes on in other people's homes. And so we're much better trying to improve our own lives.
That's a great way to talk about it. And the expectation for sort of quote unquote perfect lives, of course, they don't exist, and what would that even be for each person? I mean, I guess it's different from moment to moment in the stage of your life, and who's doing the asking. But to be able to let go of that concept that things are going to all be all things at one time. And I know at some point in the book you use the analogy of a car. One car does not have every single feature that you've ever wanted it to have. It can still be your great car.
Correct. And I also think that we often don't tell our stories in the right way. So if I had to point to one thing holding most people back, it's the way they tell their story. But if you think of the person in your life that you idolize, whether it's an entrepreneur or someone in your career, whatever it is, right? And you look at them, they're telling their story as a highlight reel. They're not telling you about the really difficult moments. They're talking about all of their highlights. And that's what you hear and that's what you believe. And that's why you think that they have the perfect life, because that's what they're sharing with the world. There's thousands of ways to tell our stories every day, right? We could tell our story as a highlight reel or a low light reel, because there is not one perfect day. Every day has high moments and low moments. One day you get great news from your boss, and then you pick up the phone and it's your kid's school and they're sick. Whatever it is, there's constantly, every single day has moment to moment highs and lows. And so it's all about how you decide to tell your life story, right? And I'm a big believer that everyone should figure out what their thread is. What's the through line of your story? So people like to talk about pivots, but but the market doesn't like pivots. It causes market confusion. People like to know. So let's say Olivia, she hosted a book club podcast and then became an author. I just fell in love with books. Like, that's not a pivot. That's a natural progression. And so I think that it's up to each person to tell that story so that people can understand your story. People like to make sense of a story. They don't want to hear about the chef that then became an accountant. They want to hear that the chef was running a restaurant, fell in love with numbers, and became an accountant, right? That's a much more appealing story. And you're like, tell me more. So people want to hear a through line to your story. So you have to find it.
So the through line for your story, I know, begins as a tennis player and tapping into all of your competitive juices and I mean, the discipline required to be playing at a high level in college and all of that. I mean, do you still feel the elements of yourself as an athlete in your daily life?
Absolutely. I think it shapes so much of who I am. I was, as you said, a competitive athlete. I had no time for a real social life in high school. I was always either playing tennis or doing homework. I was at a competitive school and I was just a worker bee. And it actually informed a lot of the way I think about life in terms of the slices was born then. Like, I remember lying in bed at night and thinking, how are things going with tennis? How are things going with school? Did I get in a fight with my mom? How are things going with my friends? Does a boy like me? Like that was kind of the way I categorized it then. And that really helped me be disciplined. I had 5 best friends. I would talk to them on the phone every night for an hour and then I'd go to sleep. Like, I really had a very, very regimented life. But also I had a mother who was a super feminist, and she would point out, I remember the day she pointed out a friend of ours in the building. I grew up in New York City in an apartment building on the 26th floor. She pointed out a friend of ours and she said, you know, Mrs. Riles actually hates her husband, but she has no money of her own, so she can never leave him. Oh my gosh. Never be like Mrs. Riles.
Mind blown.
Right? So, I mean, that's a pretty crass delivery for the message, but the message stuck with me. And ever since, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be financially independent or that I would allow myself not to be financially independent. And by the way, your relationships are better when you're financially independent because they don't have all these other things involved and strings attached. It really makes it so that you don't have a lot of the issues that some couples have where there's one earner and one person who doesn't earn any money. And then on the other side of the coin, I've also just been super passionate about helping other women reach their financial potential, which is why I started my company, because I felt like for so long I was trying to motivate people through my books or my speeches, but there was only so much I could give. And this was the first time I felt like I could give them an opportunity as opposed to just talking and trying to self-motivate them.
That is so cool. I think your mom had it right. And I'm going to remember exactly what she said in the exact way she said it. That is fantastic. You talk also in this book about parenting and about the challenges there and the balancing. And you give some really great practical guidelines for, I think, improving the relationships, or at least the leading by example, as you mentioned, including just even putting down technology for a while or trying to figure out the ways that we can show our attention to our kids when we have the time, with them understanding, I suppose, that we're busy and it's not always going to be available when they need it.
So, I mean, I really believe this, that you're much better off having 90 minutes of devoted parenting where you're truly phones off, listening, seeing your child, really having conversations with them and just letting them be with you and see that they're the center of your focus, than you are having 12 hours a day of distracted parenting. And so you can be the best parent in fewer hours a day if you're really seeing your child. By the way, that's what all of us want at the end of the day, right? Like, the relationships at work are the ones that make us feel truly seen and heard. Whether they're friendships, whether they're marriages, those are the relationships we crave, whether they're working relationships. And so if you can give that gift to your child, that just really increases their self-confidence and really helps. And the other thing is really trying to understand kind of what your values are going in. just really, I mean, we say a lot of times, like in our family, we do this because kids will constantly say, well, I don't understand. Why don't we have that rule? Or why do we do that? And this is how our family works. And our family believes in, what X, Y, Z. And that really helps your kids get around to it. I do not believe in saying, because I told you so, because they're people. Everyone wants to be respected enough to understand why. What's the why behind it? And then most kids are much more likely to follow that ideology if they feel respected.
And it's kind of almost creating your family culture like you would create a corporate culture.
Absolutely. It's so important. And it really is. And if you're single parent, you can create the culture. If you are a coupled parent, then you also want to make sure that you and your partner are on the same page about what that culture is. And it's fun to figure it out. And then, it's a lot easier to manage it because you both have the same ideas of how you want your family life to be. Now, I will tell you, Olivia, now that I have 2 teenagers and the book does not address teenagers, my life is a little harder in terms of this is what our family culture is. However, I've lost the screen battle. The pandemic kind of ruined that. I used to have a lot of structure around screens. Now it's like all bets are off. It's the only way they can communicate with their friends. I can't control it anymore. And so I've lost a little bit of control there, but I also have had to adjust some of what I thought was the right way to parent, right? Like it's actually pressuring one child is definitely not the right thing, but another child is asking me to put more structure in her life. So every child's different. And I think the most important thing is just parenting to type and trying to figure out what your kids' needs are and how you can best support them.
I want to, before we wrap up, just talk a little bit about there's a portion of the book here that says, keep your home life where it belongs at home. Now, obviously, that's been muddied up a little bit as people have been doing the work from home
That's
thing.
old pre-pandemic.
Yeah,
advice.
that's pre-pandemic. But it is, philosophically, I feel that this is a really important point to focus on, especially as we kind of adjust back to a more traditional work life.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think that everyone needs to know how the sausages are made, right? You can keep the car payment talk and the argument with your husband, save that stuff for your best friend or your mom. But at the end of the day, most people, if they're asking how you're doing at work, they kind of don't want to hear the truth. So you want to make sure that you're really responding to who people are. And by the way, I will say this, my team was always in the office together at Park Place. Okay. Now we've all been remote because of the pandemic. So what we do is we have a daily morning call. And whereas I used to be maybe a lot more all business, now the first 10 minutes of that call are like, oh my gosh, the dog had to go to the vet this morning. I mean, people really share their lives. And I think it's so important because we all crave connection. And the only way for me to understand really how a member of my team is doing is to see them on Zoom and really get a sense of like, hold on, someone's struggling or someone's unhappy or someone is doing great, whatever. It's a lot easier when we're face to face and really hearing what's going on in their lives. So it's actually in many ways brought us closer together, which I'm super grateful for. And now we're going to go back to the office, as you said. And I do think that there are especially people who have not been in the workforce for a while, don't appreciate how important it is to have some boundaries, right? And not share the whole story of what's going on at home. Share enough if you need to share, but you don't want to overdo it and you don't want it to get in the way of your work. And I think what hopefully has come out of the pandemic in terms of the workplace is that it's all about responsibility. If you are someone who can meet your deadlines, if you're someone who can get the work done, does it really matter how much FaceTime there is? In my book, no. And I'm hoping that more employers agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. Some people have emerged to show that they are very self-driven and can get everything done regardless of whether they're on site or at home. And so we're kind of going to crave, I think, a little bit more flexibility for those who can show that they're productive, right?
Yeah, it's so I started a podcast with iHeart in the pandemic. We started in September and we thought we were going to be in studio in Los Angeles, my co-host and I, and we've had to do it like from our bedrooms, and like then the weirdest part is like we're in Gloria Steinem's bedroom and Melinda Gates' home office. Like we've interviewed all of these people. I mean, right now you're seeing me in a hotel room, but it is funny how we talk all about these boundaries and then suddenly all bets are off. You're seeing, who would have ever thought that I'd be seeing, Gloria Steinem's bedroom. Like it's just a very weird thing how that's working. And, Abby Wambach and Glennon Doyle from home and their home setup. I think it's just, shocking sometimes that we've suddenly become we're in people's bedrooms now. And so the boundaries have been blurred, but it's up to us to create them, whatever feels right. And obviously, the hard thing I think for families is if you're an entrepreneur, or if you are suddenly working from home, they want to know, like, when mom or dad is like off. Are you off the call? Are you with me now? Can I visit you? Like, they really need those boundaries, and it's up to us to set them, because otherwise it feels like we're always working, right? It can feel like that to your family members. So I think it is like, we're religious about the dinner table, and everyone has dinner together. No one's allowed to bring their phone into the dining room. And, if we can have a 40-minute dinner, that's a win.
Mm-hmm. People eat really fast. They got to get back to their phones when they're teenagers,
exactly.
I can imagine. Just P.S., the podcast guest list. So this is What's Her Story? Is that?
Yeah, it's called What's Her Story with Sam and Amy. And it's
what a guest
really
list.
The guest list has been awesome. Actually, one of my latest guests, which is coming out next week, is Jennifer Weiner, the author.
Yes, we're scheduled to talk to her too. Yes.
Yeah, she'd be great for your show, by the way.
We're talking to her.
Oh,
I've already got her scheduled. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, yeah.
I'm reading that summer right now.
That's so funny. I just read it.
Oh, so good.
So good. Yeah. And actually, another book that I read recently, which is so awesome, and you should consider having her on your show because you would totally hit it off with her, is Alison Wynne Scotch's book, which is called Cleo McDougall Regrets Nothing. And it's about a presidential candidate whose like old best friend comes back to haunt her in the campaign because she's like spreading all these rumors about her, and she has to go track down the best friend. And it's super fun.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, who has, I won't have you select somebody who has maybe impressed you the most, but who do you think has a story that maybe aligns the most with what people need to hear right now that you've been able to talk to in the course of this?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think, we interviewed Austin Channing Brown, who has been kind of at the forefront of the racial reckoning that's been going on for the last year. And she's so extraordinary. I loved her book. I love everything she has to say. I follow her on social media. She'd actually be awesome for your podcast too. I'll put you in touch with her. But we did a 2-part series on her because she was so fascinating and so awesome. And I would say that's someone whose story right now is just super relevant and very relatable. It's funny, like I'm obsessed with Abby Wambach and Glennon Doyle's love story.
Same.
Like, I could not get enough of their love story. It's insane. Yep. I love it. Yeah. So that for me was like, I mean, I could listen to that all day long. And then of course we just had Melinda Gates on. And so we just re-aired that episode this week because we just interviewed her a couple of months ago, and people are kind of re-listening to it for clues because it is so, I was truly shocked by their news. And I think it just, again, shows you just don't know what's going on in people's lives and what their struggles are. But we tend to look for people who are just like badasses. So there's a bunch of corporate people that we've loved. We had Kat Cole, who was the CEO of Cinnabon, Mindy Grossman, who is the CEO of Weight Watchers. Like, they don't have books yet, but they're both just like fascinating women who've like had families and awesome careers. And I just can't get enough of these stories. I think so often we hear the same women's stories over and over. Like, you hear Sheryl Sandberg's story, and like we hear the same stories. And so it's fun to kind of uncover new ones that we might not have had a chance to hear. So that's been really rewarding.
We have both hate and gratitude for the scent of Cinnabon because it is so irresistible. There's just something like a chemical. It's like it makes me psychotic. That's crazy. Okay, I'm gonna have to listen to that because the response I have is just so overwhelming that it really lose control. It could be.
That's the goal. And she actually mentioned that, like, in an airport, they're trying to get you to eat something bad.
It's like, I'm in a rush and I shouldn't be stopping and I shouldn't be eating this anyways, but I'm going to, and it doesn't matter. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been so much fun to talk to you and to dig into your expert advice. And so your other books are all titled with expert in, which I'm just, we wrap up, I'm curious, as the expert, who do you go to for advice?
Oh gosh, such a great question. I would say, Amy, my co-host of the podcast, she's an entrepreneur, and I just finished raising a round of capital. And I'm all about, and maybe this is from my life as an athlete, I'm all about like being very self-aware of what my weaknesses are. And like, I hadn't had experience with this before. So I would constantly go to her for even small pieces of advice without like, what would you say back to this investor? Like, how do you respond to this? I really went to her for that. But then there's other people. I mean, I have a really close friend from college who's an infectious disease doctor. And throughout COVID, she's kind of been my mentor in terms of how to handle different things, what her perspective is. Even just now when I have to make a decision about whether, they're now opening up vaccines to 12 to 15-year-olds. Like, do you think that's safe? Should I do that? Like, I think that I'm not someone who has one mentor, but I do have a lot of different people I take advice from. I've also become very active on Clubhouse, the new social audio network. Yeah. And I have learned a ton from people on Clubhouse. I will say, like, I am an always be learning kind of person. And I feel like I can always learn new skills and new things. And so I really kind of taught myself Clubhouse. I spent 2 months on it, like hardcore. Now I've made a lot of relationships on there. I host a room every Monday for leading women, which I love to have you as a guest moderator one day. And people come up on stage with their problems. And it's really been very, very rewarding to have this new kind of social network with all people that I might not have had interacted with before. So I guess the answer is I go to so many different people for different things. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's that quality of a successful person that you embody, which is always learning, always curious, not afraid to ask questions, not afraid to express or no need to present a false sense of, I'm positive I know how to do this when I'm learning this. And I think if we can all sort of follow that model a little bit more, we'll have more of a community around us or people that are invested in seeing us succeed. People like to be asked for help and advice.
I completely agree. And I also think like your job as a human being is to collect people in your life, right? Like the first time I met you, I was like, I want to keep in touch with Olivia. I just really like her. So I did. And I think that like throughout my life, I've always collected people that I respect in different areas. And I'm always happy to give my friends advice when they come to me. And then I go to them. And I think that, strength comes in saying you're vulnerable and you don't know something. It's the people who pretend to know everything that end up not being as successful. So I think one of the best things you can do for yourself is to admit, I don't know. I have no idea. Right before I left, the whole mom guilt thing, I really am always, as you know, I'm like, don't feel guilty as a mom. You're a working mom, you're a role model, etc. But because it was my first business trip in 15 months, I got it in my head. I'm not a cook. I got it in my head that I had to make hard-boiled eggs before I left for the airport. I have no idea why this is important. Okay. I insisted on making a dozen hard-boiled eggs. And I used to leave like color-coded manifestos for my husband. He told me not to do that anymore ages ago. But like when he saw the hard-boiled eggs, he was like, oh my God, she's at it again. Like this is like all of her mom guilt into these hard-boiled eggs. Took a picture of the eggs, texted it to my whole family and said, these are in the fridge, healthy snack made with love for you in every bite. And it's just ridiculous. But to the point, I really had not made a hard-boiled egg in probably 10 years. So I Googled how to make a hard-boiled egg and was watching videos. So I'm always looking for advice. Yeah.
So maybe our next project will be some kind of we don't cook, so let's learn how to make a couple of things project. Because I got an invitation. I got an invitation to participate in a company event that was a Zoom, and it had to do with baking something elaborate with many steps and many ingredients, and I just said I'm allergic to baking. I can't even pretend to follow along. I'm sure I will get hives, and that's just, we got to leave it there. Samantha, it is fabulous to see you and hear you, and to be able to share your insight and expertise and lovely personality. So thank you so much. The CEO of Park Place Payments, and you can find out more information about Samantha and find her podcast and her social media feeds at her website, Samantha Ettus. That is ETTUS.com. Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing the pie life. We can all be moving towards a little sweeter sense of balance and less frantic sourness. I don't want to be so bitter.
Thanks.
Thank you. What a fun conversation with Samantha Ettus. Now it is time to transition to a moment with Margaret. I know you were listening to Sam, and she's just got she's an expert in so many things that it's it's kind of mind-boggling. So we're talking about some of the other books that we've turned to that really kind of get us salivating, get our juices flowing, thinking about life and kind of getting things organized or maybe improving our quality of life in some capacity.
Yeah, she mentioned Glennon Doyle, which is a book that I found very empowering. Her most recent book called Untamed. I actually have told other people about it. Please read if you haven't. But she talks about navigating through her divorce and a blended family and being empowered overall in her own life. And then she discusses trusting ourselves, setting our own boundaries. And I took so much from that book. And maybe she's not financial in the same way that Samantha Ettus is, but she said something in her book, which is little bites of little chapters that make it a little bit more easy to digest. So she said something about the relationship with her daughter and some of the emotions she was feeling. And she specifically said, the opposite of sensitive is insensitive, and that is no badge of honor. Mm-hmm. And that is something that I took very deeply from that book. People call me sensitive sometimes. And yes, I am. But I've never really thought about, you know what, if you're not sensitive, you're insensitive.
And that's the negative.
And that's the negative. And, sensitive. And she was talking about how words of that kind of like bossy, is always used as a weapon against women, and feeling empowered within yourself and setting your own boundaries about what is okay and what is not. And I was so empowered by that book.
Yeah, she's great. And I love that idea too. When she really taps into, she's very raw. She's very open. She feels stuff, and talks about her as one daughter, I believe, that is kind of the same way.
Yes,
and that we shouldn't strive to create a society where we're all forced to suppress our emotions and kind of go through in a robotic state of feeling nothing. That's not the goal.
And she said there's another piece in that same idea, that the idea of feelings is to actually feel them and not push them aside, not try to really go through it. And she said, if you're doing it right, it's going to hurt sometimes. And I think that was really important. We try to kind of push away, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling super happy. You just try to stay in this constant state of middle ground. And she's saying you're supposed to be feeling those things. If you're upset, feel upset. You don't need to wallow in it, but let yourself feel it, let it run its course, and move on.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really important to express to other people.
Well, and she says that we can go through hard stuff, or we can get through
we can do hard things, which is the name of her new podcast, which is very exciting. So I can't wait to listen.
And it always goes back fundamentally to that theme that she's telling you. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean finding a lifestyle that where you're immune to the pains of the world. Feel them, do something about them. She's called to activism because she feels deeply about what she sees as an injustice, or pain for other people, even if it might not directly affect her. She still feels it, and still. I really like her. And I loved Love Warrior, because to me that when she was kind of just in the thick of the pain in her marriage and dealing with just a variety of issues and kind of trying to figure out how to dig herself out of a well of real despair.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the reasons why I started to practice yoga, because part of her healing through that journey was she ended up starting to practice hot yoga and found it to be a good place to cry and a good place to get a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, just feel what she was feeling.
To be able to be just be
in her safe space.
Yeah. And so I think her voice in all spaces is really so worthwhile. Another book that in the same kind of vein that I really enjoyed is More Than Enough by Elaine Welteroth, and she is kind of a young, now she's one of the co-hosts of The Talk, and she's a judge on Project Runway.
She did
you.
Teen Vogue editor.
Yes. So she was the youngest Condé Nast editor-in-chief of any of their publications, and she's a Black woman. She's a biracial woman. And so her book is very much, it's memoir, but also just kind of utilizing her incredible path of success to help other people kind of tap into being, the most effective self they can be. And she really just, she's kind of like an Oprah. I mean, she just sort of manages to pinpoint those moments of insecurity and figure out how to get past them.
Yeah.
How to confront stuff and then just move forward, and has a gift at connecting people and creating opportunity. And so I found it to be really enjoyable, and also a really useful read to understand what it's like to live in a world as a Black woman, and also in a biracial family. And so how she went through stages of trying to blend in and be like everybody else, to really wanting to, stand out and take up space and have her cultural identity and racial identity observed and, as much a part of herself as everything else. And so I really enjoyed that. And I think it would be a good gift for a grad right now that we're in grad season.
And she was in a very difficult, she still is in a very difficult industry where that's always been something that not a lot of diversity.
No, you're fighting against the old model of beauty, right?
Yes.
Which is, an extremely tall, extremely skinny, beautiful white woman.
And I think Teen Vogue does well as far as hiring young women to be their editors. And I think that's important. So
so that's a great book.
Yes.
So, and both of those. So Untamed, definitely, all of what Glennon Doyle is doing. And then we recently had the opportunity on the morning show to talk to one of our Bravo celebrities.
Yes.
We love our Bravo shows.
so
And we've been on a break from Vanderpump Rules, wondering
Yes.
what in the world it's gonna be like when it comes back, with everybody being adults and having babies or being kicked off for
a lot of babies.
a lot of babies and a lot of
babies.
inappropriate social media posts that resulted in
Absolutely.
termination. So who knows what the show's going to look like?
Yeah.
But we know that Lala looks really good as a new mom, and she is also now a new author.
New author. Her new book is titled the same as the beauty company that she also is the CEO and founder of, called Give Them Lala. And I think what's really cool about her book and about her life in general is that you have seen her change from a person who was totally scared to be on a reality show and kind of lashed out at people and struggling through addiction with alcohol.
And a lot of anxiety that she said she was kind of
anxiety.
treating her anxiety with
the alcohol,
booze to
and
cope
it's-
with the
yeah.
social, and then
And it's a vicious cycle. Because she couldn't get out of it, and how that all helped or hindered her relationship with Randall, and just becoming a new mom and being the CEO of a beauty company while being kind of a target from Vanderpump Rules, and maybe not from the network itself, or just the way that she was with her addiction, that she was coming off. But you can see even through those episodes how she has evolved.
Oh, big time.
And so her book talks about the evolvement of her personal life and her professional life, and she was incredible. That conversation you had with her the other morning was lovely.
Yeah, it's cool to see people in these transitions because, I know I am delusional, but I feel like I know them. So,
Me too.
That's the point, right? That's the point of the reality television, but I do get sucked in.
Yes.
And I am rooting for her to continue on in her sobriety and success. And I just think, having a very authentic voice. And I was about to order it. I was thinking especially for my niece who's graduating from high school. But then one of the big chapters is about her going through her hoe phase and how,
Yes.
that's just something to embrace. But here's how this and that. I was like, well,
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I better ask my sister first. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's something that her sexuality she does go into, and she gets a little bit about it on camera on Vanderpump Rules, but she talks more about, the negativity or the lines that are drawn between men and women, and she talks about that
And
more
she has
in
a
depth.
very strong point in that, is
She
that
does.
we elevate these guys for getting whatever they want to get, and then
Right.
we really condemn women for it. And so she is pushing back on that from that stage of her life. She's not in that stage
Women
anymore, of
against
course.
women,
Right,
too.
which
She
is
said a
not
big
cool.
Right. She said a big turning point in her life with Vanderpump Rules, while in this book, was Katie, another cast member, who was, for lack of a better term, slut shaming her. She said when Katie apologized, that was when things turned for her, and she realized, okay, this can be done. We can get to a positive space. And women against women is a big thing that she talks about as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of fun reads out there, and I enjoy a good memoir for these reasons, because if someone's willing to share all of the bumps and hurdles that they have been through, then why shouldn't we take advantage of their experiences and learn what we can and maybe save ourselves a scrape or a bruise along the way. So as we like to say, you get more interesting with every book. So a good book or a bad book, read a book and let us know what you're reading. You can email Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com or find us on social media. Margaret is at
Overbooked and Overdue on Instagram. Yep.
The struggle is real. She sounds fatigued just saying it, right? Overbooked and Overdue. You can find me at Olivia Fierro or at olivias.bookclub on Instagram or at Olivia Fierro on Facebook. Until next time, keep reading.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. Our editor is Nick Sanchez. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.